So you ready?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ohio State Primetime Live. I'm your co-host Ryan Stano.
I'm Garrison Gaddy.
Well, Garrison, we have a lot to talk about. Unfortunately, Ohio State has to replace another coordinator because Chip Kelly decided to make the decision to bolt to the NFL. And now he is the new offensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. So I've got a lot of questions for you, but first I want to hear what your initial thought was when Chip Kelly, when that news hit that Chip Kelly was heading out the door.
Well, I wasn't surprised. I won't say I always knew because of course, I wouldn't know this, but I was of the mindset that Chip Kelly, being age 60, 61, wasn't going to be here that long. As far as I was concerned, from the outside looking in, it looked like he just didn't want to be a head coach in college football. Doesn't want to deal with NIL. Doesn't want to deal with 18-year-olds. Doesn't want to deal with 17, 16-year-olds. Doesn't want to deal with recruiting business, working all year, no time off.
Yep.
Boosters. Should I keep going? Athletic department. Like, it's just, there's a lot you got to deal with. Parents. So it felt like he didn't want to deal with that anymore. Came to Ohio State based on what Ryan Day said on Joel Klatt's platform at an interview, and actually the news broke while they were recording, which is funny. But
I was going to ask you about that also.
Yeah, and it felt like we can get more to that, but it felt like Ryan Day knew this. It looked like they had a handshake agreement. I think Chip Kelly knew that being at Ohio State for a year with the talent that we had was gonna probably have his name up in NFL circles really quickly, more so than it already was, and it worked. And now the guy is the highest paid coordinator in the NFL for the Las Vegas Raiders, and it's worth it. I mean, it was worth it, and he deserves it.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I had talked about how we didn't think Kelly was the long-term answer as the offensive coordinator here. Like you mentioned, he didn't want to be a head coach in college for all of those reasons. And with his age, being what it was, he doesn't want to be a college coordinator forever. He would rather have the opportunity to go back to the NFL, show that he can actually, succeed at that level, whether it be a coordinator or a head coaching job. My opinion is he's going to try to become a head coach again. He wanted to springboard as a coordinator into the NFL to try to get one last gig.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, this year could not have worked out more perfectly for him. He decides to join Ohio State late after Bill O'Brien bolts for Boston College. He gets to coach one of the most talented rosters that college football has. And then they win the national championship with the offense playing a large part of that. Things could not have gone better for Chip Kelly.
With a brand new quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. So, you mentioned Joel Klatt, the podcast he talked with Day, and Day said, hey, when I hired Chip, we talked about the fact, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could, win a national title together and, just kind of, have that relationship where it's just us to do that. And that's exactly what happened. And he obviously wasn't surprised. What was surprising was that, I didn't hear any news about him interviewing with the Raiders. We'd heard the rumors of him with the Texans and the Bucks, but I mean, did you hear anything about Vegas? I didn't.
No, I did not. But it felt like Houston probably was going somewhere around like a normal range of pay. But as we know about the Raiders throughout history, when they hire a coach or a player, they make a splash with it.
They go big.
Yeah, and they will pay for you. And,
I mean, that money's crazy for a coordinator. $6 million? About triple his salary from Ohio State. I mean, honestly, I'd have more concerns if Kelly said no to
that. Also, Ryan, that's what I was going to say next. Like, how does a guy say no to that? I mean, you get to live in Vegas. It's not like he can gamble, but it's just too good of a job. And I mean, what's really cool about being Ohio State right now is that no matter what you say, any NFL job is better than a college job. But right after the NFL, Ohio State has probably the three biggest or most wanted positions in football, and that's both coordinators and the offensive line coach. And I mean, even with losing them, it doesn't worry me much.
And I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on the fact that any job in the NFL is better than a college job. There are certain situations where you don't necessarily want to be in the NFL. And I'm including even coordinators with that. You know, in some instances, with a program like Ohio State, they can offer a ton of money for a coordinator to kind of keep them from going to the NFL. Now, head coaching, you're not going to beat that. Anybody's going to want a head coaching job. But I think there's like few programs that can offer enough money and perks where it at least is a conversation to stay. And
yeah, I agree with
I don't blame Chip at all for leaving. Like I said, I have more concerns if he decided to pass on that money. I think I'm a little surprised by his choice to go to Vegas, you know, with the talent or lack of talent that they have. But you know, that's his choice. He wanted to work under Pete Carroll. You know, he knows Pete. He's worked with him, or he's coached, you know, the same conference with him for a while. So, you know, he coached against him in the same division at one point when he was with the Niners. So, it's, you know, it's unfortunate that Ohio State has to replace both coordinators, but also this is something we talked about when you're talking about Knowles. This is what happens when you're at the top. I mean, other schools, NFL teams, they come for your talent. And Alabama had to deal with this for years. Georgia had to deal with it. You know, this is the price of winning a national title. It's a price I'm certainly willing to pay. So they're going to have a lot of options to fill both these coordinator positions. And when he was talking to Klatt, he also mentioned that they weren't going to rush this search. They were going to take their time, make sure they make the right hire, not just the quick hire. So I wouldn't be surprised if it took, you know, a few more days, maybe a couple more weeks to make sure that all of these positions get filled.
Most definitely. And for a position like this and something it's time sensitive, but it's a very sensitive job. You can't rush through things like this. And worst comes to worst, the worst possible thing that Ohio State could do is Ryan Day do the play calling. Now, do we want that right now? No, but that's the worst possible thing, and it ain't that bad. And so I
understand what you're saying.
I'm not saying that we want that to happen.
Sure. So then let's kind of get into it then. As far as Chip goes, would you be okay? And I've seen this idea floated around. If they were to promote Brian Hartline to offensive coordinator and have Day as the play caller again, would that be something you would be okay with?
No. I think that 2 years ago, the year before, Ryan Day had to hit the play calling because it just wasn't working out. I mean, again, Brian Hartline that year was a first-time play caller. And I think
he didn't really get a chance to be a play caller. He called plays like in the spring game, and that was it. Day's like, nope, I'm taking it back over. I thought that was strange.
I have to assume he saw something that he wasn't comfortable with. And I trust Ryan Day enough to be okay with that. But if, in my perfect world, you give Brian Hartline you let him be the OC, but you let him be the co-OC. I'm looking for somebody else. I need someone that's established. I think that when you have a young team like this, you need someone that's established. And Brian Hartline, he's not that yet. And, you know, it's eventually we have to, the conversation will come up, you know, about Brian Hartline leaving. Because someone's going to
like, I'm trying to have that now. Like, if they don't promote him, like, he's going to be gone too.
Yeah, that's the game, you know. It is the game. To be honest, as much as the Brian Hartline wide receiver development has been top tier, I'm not going to sit here at like Ohio State doesn't get wide receivers even without him. So eventually the time's going to come, but you do have to ponder whether you make Brian Hartline the full-blown offensive coordinator or the co-offensive coordinator. Because if you're going to do that, I don't think Ryan Day should be calling plays. If you're going to do it, Ryan, let him call.
Okay. So I've got two schools of thought that kind of oppose each other as far as the Hartline hire or promotion is concerned. So let's say they really want to keep Hartline, which they should, because he is their most valuable assistant. I think he's the most valuable assistant in the country, quite frankly, with not only his recruiting, but developing of their wide receivers. I also think that he is going to want to eventually call plays. Like, he wants that promotion. He wants to have that on his roster, or I'm sorry, on his resume, so he can eventually get a head coaching job. Like, he's interviewed for a couple head coaching positions that are, regional here, but no one's going to give him a head job if he hasn't called plays or even really coordinated an offense.
Right.
So at some point he is going to want that. And then if he doesn't get it, he might up and leave. At the same time, if he calls plays now, he has a lot of talent on that field. It's when you got Jeremiah Smith on the field, I think it's almost kind of hard to screw things up. Just throw that man the ball and let him go. But at the same time, it does scare me to have a first-time play caller at Ohio State, especially one with this much talent, where if they do screw it up, then you're kind of back to square one. Like, you're in a Kerry Combs situation with what he did with the defense. And that's not something I really want to have happen. So I'm conflicted.
You have every right to be. It's not an easy position to be in. Again, if worse comes to worse, and we get a situation where a few games the offense isn't looking good, Brian Hartline is the OC. It's not working out. We can always fall back on Ryan Day. At the end of the day, Ryan Day is one of the top play callers in college football. As much as everyone wants to forget that, and we wanted him to move to the CEO position, which he should have, he is still one of the best play callers in the nation. But and then the funny thing is, I don't know. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I had some issues with his play calling. Really up the final season he called plays up until the Georgia game. I thought the Georgia game was the best game he called in his play calling career. But I will say, if it does fall back on him, I'm hoping he takes some notes from Chip and he just keeps going with the aggressive offensive play calling like he had. If he does, I hope he learned. But continue.
No, and no, I'm going to add on to that. And if you're Ryan Day, you have to switch the offense to some extent, depending on who your quarterback is. Like, say if somehow Tavian St. Clair is the quarterback next season, you probably want to run something more that's like Will Howard's offense, JTT's offense, whatever that looks like. And then if you have Julian Saint, you are going to have to make some type of changes. But if you don't have to, man, you got to let these guys know, whoever comes in, look, this is what we had success doing last year, specifically at the end of the season in that playoff. What we're going to do is spread these teams out, throw the ball, and run pass the ball to open up the run. And I think as long as Ryan Day can take control of how this offense is ran, but not be the play caller, then we're all set.
I think that whoever the hire is, whether it's Hartline or someone from the outside, I do think Day needs to make sure that they're going to have Chip Kelly. He's an offensive savant. Like, he loves. We talked about how much he loves coaching ball, how he just loves drawing up plays. I mean, hell, he took a play from the Ohio State National Championship game against Alabama and used it against Notre Dame. Yeah. So, like, he does that kind of stuff. And if it's going to be tough to replace that. But whoever he hires, he needs to make sure that they're going to have the same sort of aggressive mindset where, hey, if we're going to get beat, it's not going to be because we turtle up into a shell and beat ourselves like that happened against Michigan. It's going to be because we just simply didn't execute the game plan, and we'll figure out those issues, as they come. I think whoever is going to be calling the plays, they need to stay with that aggressive mindset. And I think that's kind of the big thing with this specific hire.
What? So, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, if you don't want Hartline, who would be your ideal outside hire? And I'm pretty sure that's where you were going as well.
I don't know yet. This was funny
Okay.
about it. I don't know. I believe Ohio State, outside maybe a couple teams, can get almost any can call any college offensive coordinator right now and get them in Columbus for an interview, or to get them in Columbus to hire them. I believe we can do that. I
Yep.
think it just depends on whose system it is, and that's why it's not. I'm not really worried about like the defensive coordinator position. You can get someone from hell San Jose State, and it
Yeah,
might
we'll
work.
talk about that later.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to affect as much as the offense can, but or it can still go well. I think for our offense, man, there's just too much good on it for it to go for it to go bad. I just don't think it can go bad. I don't see a situation where it could happen. So for me, it's just make a good hire.
The only way I see it going quote unquote bad is they have this will be this really third straight year where they've had a first time starting quarterback. But this time it's going to be someone who doesn't have a whole lot of experience playing. Like Will Howard he'd started 3 straight years, at Kansas State. So he knew how to play winning football. He knew what it took to win. And obviously we saw he won at the highest level. Kyle McCord didn't really know how to win. He didn't know the experience. He didn't have the experience that he needed in order to beat, to win that final game, which could have also helped Ohio State play for national title there. So, having your options be Julian Sayin, Licken Kean-Holtz, or Tavian St. Clair, that can be tough for an incoming OC, no matter who it is, just because you don't know what you're going to get out of that position yet. So that's the only way I really see it going bad. The offensive line, I worry about a little bit now that Fry is gone. That hire is also going to be key. So I actually think in a way, it's actually good that both the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach are gone, because now you can kind of marry those hires. You can, when you get the OC, you pick, okay, what do you really value up front? What are the traits you're looking for? What scheme do you like to run? Let's go ahead and find that guy for you and make that hire. So I think that makes that hire a little bit easier. But the fact that they would have a new quarterback, that's the only thing. Yeah, that's the only way where I think this hire goes quote unquote wrong.
Yeah, in my perfect world, I was gonna say, like in my perfect world, if we could find someone who has some offensive line experience and be like a co-OC.
I've seen some Buckeye fans want Kevin Wilson to come back because of the fact that he was the co-OC and he has got offensive line experience, worked with the tight ends. He's intimately familiar with Ohio State, and I don't know how I would feel about that necessarily. I don't think he's a bad play caller. I don't think he's a great play caller. If you're going to hire someone from outside, I'd rather hire someone with a higher ceiling. Wilson's, kind of older. I know he's also going to want to look for another head coaching spot. He didn't really succeed at Tulsa. Obviously, the whole reason he was available for Ohio State was because he got fired at IU for treatment of players and whatnot. So I would like to go outside of that hiring tree if they can. I've also heard some people say they want to try to get Tommy Rees. That's the big name that I've heard all of Ohio State fans really want to get. The issue with Tommy Rees is first of all, he doesn't really he's young. He's only 32. He also literally just took the Cleveland Browns job. He's now their offensive coordinator. In order to bring him back down to the college level, you saw how much Chip Kelly just got paid to be a coordinator. I don't know how much Rees is making, but it won't be cheap to bring him back down to the collegiate level. He's only been an offensive coordinator at the college level once, and that was with Alabama back in 2023. I guess he was the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame as well before that. So excuse me, he's done it for multiple years, but he's still the main issue is getting him out of Cleveland down to Columbus. Make that I-71 trip down, and I don't think that's realistic for him to want to make that decision unless he gets up there and realizes just how much of a shit show Jimmy Haslam is, which he is. Jimmy Haslam is a shit show. So, we know that's true. So there's going to be a lot of other names thrown out there, but like I said, Day is going to take his time. He's going to make sure they get the right guy, and he's not going to stop until he finds that guy.
I do have one name. I have two names. And I was like, what names do I know that I like, that I've either heard or like offenses I've paid attention to a lot this season? Charlie Weiss Jr.
Interesting. Okay.
Out of Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a really good program, but it's a very small D1 program. Ohio State has the money. I think we have more resources. I think we have the talent. I think like I said, these are people that I would just want to give a call to. Like when we talked about defense, I say, you know what? I will call Dante Lynn. That's just someone like in my perfect world. That's someone I will call because if I see something that I like it. The other one was Dirk Culture over at Boise State. I think what they were able to do in the run game this season was very impressive just due to the fact that the offensive line is not the same offensive line that other programs have. Outside of that, again, I'm not worried so much about who we really have at OC.
Okay.
If I was told Brian Hartline was the first choice, I am not upset. I am not upset.
I don't know if I'd be upset. So to your point about Charlie Weiss Jr., I don't think that's necessarily a bad name. It does concern me with what I saw in those games that Ole Miss lost, which is the whole reason they did make college football playoff. You only score 17 points at home against Kentucky, and you only score you score 26 points against LSU, but you lose that game. That one was on the road. I get that's a little bit tougher, but you only score 26 at home against a really bad Oklahoma team. So I'm not saying that would necessarily be bad. You only score 17 against Florida in a loss. So again, I'm not saying that would be a horrible name. Again, if you're making calls to outside candidates, I think he should be on the list. I do think that's a call you make. But we'll see. I see some people now here in the chat saying no Tommy Rees. They don't want Tommy, which is interesting.
Well, do you think Ohio State is a place where you should be able to learn on the job? If you allowed Ryan Day to do it, because I forget who said this.
I was going to say Ryan Day did it.
No, I was listening to the Cover 3 podcast, and I think it was Tom Fernelli that said it. He said Ohio State is not a job you learn not a place where you learn on the job. And I was like, Ryan Day literally has been doing that for the last 6 years. So
well, normally I would say no. But obviously, like you mentioned, Ryan Day did it when he became the head coach. He was a first-time head coach at that time. And quite frankly, when Day was hired to be the offensive coordinator, he hadn't been an offensive coordinator before. He was brought in as the co-OC in 2017. And along with Wilson. And he had never called plays before up until that point. So they're obviously more comfortable with it now. I think it depends on who you are trying to bring in to, quote unquote, learn on the job. So if it ends up being Hartline, he has been in the program for quite a while. He obviously has the trust of the wide receivers. He's got a great list. He's got a great group of guys there at the receiver position. I think you worry a little bit about being a first-time play caller coming off a national championship. But also at the same time, I think that would kind of be the perfect scenario for something like that, where the expectations aren't, hey, we've got to win, otherwise we're going to run you out of town because we're just coming off a national title. So you could have a little bit more time to learn on the job if that were the case. So I do think it would be interesting. Now, I don't know I don't want someone who is going to learn on the job on the defensive side for the defensive coordinator position. And that's kind of where I want to transition into. Is I know we've talked about the fact that, Knowles left. There's some there have been some names thrown out as far as who could be the DC. Matt Guerrieri, and he seems to be the favorite right now to get promoted up there. He was a former defensive coordinator, so that would make me feel better. There's also been talk about him possibly being a co-DC with Tim Walton. And then there was also talk about bringing in Randy Bates from Pitt. So of those three scenarios, which of those do you feel more comfortable with? I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that here. Go ahead and run.
Ohio State, Michigan, the greatest rivalry in sports deserves the greatest debate in sports. Monday, February 17th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the main channel. It's the Ohio State, Michigan All Everything Debate with me, taking your calls all night if it takes all night. I'm pulling no punches, so beware. Bring your best intel. It's the Ohio State, Michigan All Everything Debate. It will be epic. February 17th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Be there.
So, yeah, be there. That will be epic to see. But the DC. So, which of those three options do you like the most?
Gutierrez. I was against. I won't say against it, but I wasn't really for it at first. But he kind of reminds me of. I won't say he reminds me of, but I feel as though if someone makes you the assistant defensive coordinator, they're doing it for a reason. And usually, it might be a guy who's not a position coach. I mean, he might be an assistant, but they have enough belief in the guy to where they're like, no, he knows enough. He's very smart. He's up and coming. He's a fast riser. The same thing you say. You want to find someone who's a rising star in that space as an offensive coordinator. He is that as a defensive person or a defensive coach. And I think that when you have someone that you believe in the Woody that you think that highly of, someone that Ryan Day spoke about at the championship ceremony and
Yep.
at the shoe.
Yep.
Well, but put your money where your mouth is and make him the guy. I think that if he's that talented and you think that highly of him, put him in the position.
Yeah. So Guerrieri is obviously someone that they think extremely highly of. He is an Ohio native. He's only 35, and he's been a co-DC at two different stops. He was one with Duke from 2018 to 2021, and he was with Indiana in 2023 before he came here. So he is someone that they feel is a rising star. They don't want to lose him. And in order to do that, this would be the way to go, to promote him either in a co-DC capacity or just give him the full reins. So he is someone, the safeties, it's hard to argue how well they, it's hard to argue against how they played this season, with Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs. For me, if they were going to do it, I would prefer them to do a co-DC model with him and Walton if they were going to keep the hire internal, because Walton has already proved to be a recruiting superstar as well. He's kind of, I know you mentioned this last week, he's kind of the Brian Hartline of the defense, where he's a great recruiter, has shown the ability to develop at that position, but you also want to keep him because other programs are going to notice his value and they're going to try to poach him. So, making him the co-DC, but having Guerrieri the play caller on defense, I think is the way to go if you're going to do it an internal hire. Now, again, I'm not sure if I want an internal hire here. I would actually be more inclined to go for an external hire with the defense than I would be on offense. And the name that's been thrown around is Randy Bates. The issue with Bates is he's already like he's 64 years old right now. He's not going to get any younger. You're going to be in the same position that you were with Chip, where you've got an older guy who, he's never been a head coach before. If the defense starts playing well, then all of a sudden he's going to start getting calls. He's an alumnus, so that's why his name's been thrown around. And, Pitt's defenses have been pretty decent these last 5 years.
Yeah.
So I think it would be a good hire if that's what they go with. I just worry about having to make this same decision 3-4 years from now where you're going to have to rehire. Which, again, that's the price of being great, and I hope they're great.
Oh, for sure. And, I saw a lot of people say, why don't we – and this is a name I'm surprised is still in Iowa, but everyone's asking, why don't we call Phil Parker? Well, he's an older guy, and you don't know if you want to bring him in.
I would love Phil Parker, but he's shown no inclination to want to leave. So
yeah, exactly. And if someone doesn't want to leave the state of Iowa, they don't want to leave the state of Iowa. Who am I to tell them? So, but I personally think it is time to make a switch to more younger coaches. Or not more younger, but younger coaches. I think this is the right time to do it. We just had Chip leave. We just had Jim leave. We have a very young
one more person I would like to see leave. If you're talking about getting younger, there's one specific person.
Oh man! I think we lost someone very, very vital because of him.
Yeah, I think you're right. And for those who don't know, you're talking about Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach who's been holding on. Yeah, they did lose a replacement, quite frankly. He's part of the reason why Jim Knowles is no longer here. And at best, he's got 1 or 2 years left, like maybe. I'm kind of hoping that if there's a new DC hire who comes in externally, they're like, look, Larry, you're great, but I'm going to hire one of my own guys. That would be my preferred scenario. Because, the man's he's about 70 years old. Like, let's stop beating around the bush here. He did great things. He's been on 2 different national championship teams now. But it seems like things may have passed him by a bit, specifically on the recruiting trail. So I think it's time to let go.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. Because on the recruiting, like when you talk, like with last year when guys like Ezra Houston and the rest of those recruits are talking, the way they talk about Larry Johnson, like it's so funny. I feel as though the recruits hold him in a higher regard than we do as fans. And I think it's because of what we've seen over the last few years as fans. I think we have every right to feel the way we do. But as soon as I saw the news, man, I just at some point, good God, Larry's got to go.
Yes, and you talk about the recruits and how they speak of Larry Johnson. Make no mistake about it. Larry Johnson was a very good defensive line coach for a very long time, even going back to his time at Penn State.
Yeah.
So he has been really good. The guys he brought in over the last 10 years have been great. Joey Bosa, both Bosa brothers, Chase Young, Tyquan Lewis, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. Those are some top stud recruits. But then you look at some of the recruiting classes they've had recently, and you see not just the star rating not as high as it used to be, but also the quantity of the defensive linemen they're bringing in has dropped as well. That's where I think the issue lies, because there are going to be programs out there which, they are doing it. They're negatively recruiting against Ohio State because of Larry Johnson's age and things of that nature. They're going to be like, hey, he's not going to be there very long. He's close to retirement. Why would you want to go play for him when he's not going to be there? So I think it's time to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I want to get this comment from Christopher Sowers. Days and later that happened, attempts to have so much respect for him. Having too much respect for someone can put you in a very bad situation. It really can. We saw that with some of the hires that Urban made. Just to make it non-Ohio State. You look at when Mark D'Antoni was at Michigan State and he kept Tressel's brother around way too long because you respect someone too much.
You talk about Urban. I mean, the respect he had for Earl Bruce is the whole reason why Zach Smith was still on staff.
Exactly. So, I mean, eventually, just because you respect someone, man, doesn't mean you got to keep them on staff. I mean, I talked about it earlier in the season, or I'm sorry, we talked about it late in the season where, I think Ryan Day sometimes has a problem making sure that guys know that they are his subordinates. And Larry just happens to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think
no?
He finally told him, yeah, you're my subordinate and you're Jim Knowles' subordinate, after the Oregon loss. That was the only type that actually, that was the only time that actually happened. So I think it's time that they do move on from Johnson. But like you mentioned, the problem is that they had his replacement in-house and they let him get hired by somebody else. And for those of you who don't know, Chip Kelly was the only person to leave yesterday. Alan Clark is someone who helped the defensive line last year. He was a GA, but he helped with the defensive line each of the past 2 years. He has now been hired by Texas as their outside linebackers coach. So
basically their edge rusher.
Yeah. So now, not only do you lose your possible replacement, but he goes to another big-time program, and he's going to go help them, who, by the way, come into the shoe for the first game next year. So that, all in all, is not great.
Yeah. And the thing is, I believe Clark would have – I think next season would have been one of his would have been the season that he really needed, because the guys that we have next season, specifically on the edge, are more of the guys I think he wants to coach, more athletic, faster twitch guys like Caden Curry, like Jackson Jr., like CJ Hicks moving down there. So honestly, if you ask me, out of the 4 guys that left recently, that's the one that kind of upset me. That's the one that upset me. I mean, Justin Fry leaving, that was understandable. Because honestly, man, what he did this season, man, capitalized off of it.
He deserves it. He deserves that raise to go to Arizona. Honestly, good for him.
It was surprising.
I was talking about wanting him gone too. Yeah, so I mean, he deserves all his flowers. Wish him all the luck, coaching Paris Johnson Jr. and all those guys. I want to get to this.
Oh, thank you. I was waiting for you to do it.
Yeah. So Knowles is not part of the reason why the defense was struggling early this season. Knowles is the only reason why this defense was able to rebound as quickly in the last few years. He took a defense that was allowing too many big plays, getting gashed game after game, and turned them into a top 5 defense in year 1. Not just this year, year 1. In this past year, he turned them into the best defense in the country. So Knowles was pretty damn good. There's a reason he's now the highest paid defensive coordinator in the sport. It's because he is that damn good. No one's a god, but he's the best defensive coordinator in the sport. So losing him is a big deal.
Yeah, he may not be a god, but the football gods, they favor him. Let's not remember. We have time. Let's break this down for a second.
Let's break it down.
2020, 2019, great. 2020, pretty good. Then you get 2021, which defense was just terrible, the worst that we have seen since 2018, and which means that if you're close to 2018, you're probably one of the worst ever come through Ohio State. And then he comes in 2022. Now the defense is still struggling. They're still giving up a lot of big plays, as we saw in the Michigan game, as we saw in the Georgia game, and as we saw in the Oregon game. I'm sorry, that was 2021. But the year before. But the defense did get better. They went from being top 80 in 2021 to top 20 his first season. Then you bring in 2023 when he gave us one of the best Ohio State defenses we have seen in recent history. They were top 3 last season, were they not, Brian?
Yeah.
Behind Michigan, I believe. I don't
remember who's in front of them, but
well, and just as you said, they come in this year. I mean, they finished this year now at number 1. By the way, before the season, Ryan, I had posted something from a hot take I had, and I guess it wasn't that hot anymore. But I said, I guarantee Ohio State will give up less than 175 passing yards a game next season. Without doubt, they did. And so what he did for this defense was just outstanding. And it can't be overlooked.
Yeah. And also, they ripped Knowles. No, they set things straight because, quite frankly, it was Larry Johnson who was winning that struggle because he wanted the defensive line to play a certain way. And then he realized, oh, wait, this isn't working. Let me turn it over to Knowles, who has proven that he can actually have a good defense over this past, couple years. Larry, go sit down. So that's what happened, and that's why the defense got a lot better. So
in 1 second, wait, in Boot Zealot, look, man, we don't have the name call here, but I'll give you some insight. So as someone that has played college football and been around a lot of guys that play college football and at a higher level than I have, there are specific guys, even once you get past the coordinators, even once you get past position coaches, there are guys that are seen as high risers and as rising stars in college and coaching. And then when they get a lot of guys are talking about them, and mind you, it's not just us. Go listen to the guys that my guys over at Best Damn Media, Mike, Ron, and all those guys. They will sit here and tell you the same thing. And go listen to Minister Sports. Go listen to Zach Smith. Go listen to Chris Drew. And when they talk about Alan Clark, they give him high praise. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why Texas just took him away from us. They see the potential he has. There's a reason why they gave him the outside linebacker, basically edge rusher's coach position, because they see the talent he has. They know what he does. Dude, there's a lot of things they show videos of, and a lot of things the players have talked about with the things how they've got their hand movement, how they've gotten better at that because of him. Not because of Larry, but because of him.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, listen, man, you can call us morons, but I'm sitting here telling you we know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about Alan Clark.
Yeah, he's good. It's a shame to lose him. But who would be the ideal defensive coordinator in our eyes?
Jim Knowles.
Who do you think? You said Jim Knowles? Yeah, of course. But in a post-Jim Knowles world, where do we go from here? Because, as we mentioned, Ohio State has to, they've got to get a new defensive coordinator. And the old defensive coordinator took a defense that was in the, they were like 50th in total defense and turned them into a top 5 defense the next year. So who do you think they are? Who would be the perfect hire for you?
Perfect hire. You know what? I'm gonna let you answer. I have my notes right here because I have like a bunch
I'll
of
go
notes.
ahead and fire one.
Yeah, go ahead and fire.
Of the available options, it's someone we've already mentioned. I mean, I understand he's not necessarily the youngest person out there, but if you give me Phil Parker, I'd be happy with that. Ohio native. He is 61, but talk about someone who has done a lot with lesser talent. Iowa, yeah, they've had some good recruits in the past, but they don't get the top 5-star guys like Ohio State consistently gets because of their tradition, the facilities, and, their just history of winning. He's had to do it with 3- and 4-star guys. And he's been the defensive coordinator for over a decade now. Iowa always says, a top 25 defense in the country. He obviously would have a good handle on how to recruit in the Big Ten. And bringing him in would, I think, in my opinion, that would be the ideal hire. Now, it doesn't sound like they're going to get him, but I'd throw money at him and make him say no.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, I think Phil Parker, take away his age. And first of all, listen, I used to be an HR guy. We don't want to do ageism here. Phil Parker, if you want to come to Ohio State, please. I
was HR too. Yeah, no ageism here. Bring them on.
I'd be very thankful, sir. Now, so I went back and I looked at the 2 names I had circled. it was Jim Leonard and then Dante Lynn. And have I told you why I want him so badly?
Who, Lynn or Leonard?
Dante Lynn.
No.
Football is like in the NFL and college football, it's a copycat league. When I consistently see a specific type of defense work, I'm sold. Or even offensive scheme work, I'm sold. Whatever the Ravens have been doing over the last 10 years is clearly work. It has clearly worked. Clearly, whatever those guys in Ann Arbor have been doing against us with that defense has worked. Now, Dante Lynn, coming from UCLA, had one of their best defensive years when he was there prior to the year before coming to USC. Now, even though we talked about this before, even though USC they weren't world beaters on defense, they got significantly better than they were last season. I think if you gave a guy like him with that system, he's not as good as like a Jesse Minter is, but if you bring that system and you give him the players to run it, who knows what it looks like? I mean, for example, go look at when was it Jesse Minter at? No, he wasn't at Vanderbilt. It was it Minter?
You're talking about James Franklin. James Franklin was
no.
Are you talking about the DC?
The DC for the Michigan. It wasn't Minter.
Yeah.
It was,
I mean, before it was Wink. It was Martindale.
No, the year before Jesse Minter, it was or was it Minter?
Minter has been there.
They had two DCs before.
Minter was there in 2020. Minter was there in 22 and 23.
So the one before him, because they had one more before him.
Oh, Don Brown?
No, they came for the Ravens. They had two guys that came. I can't remember his name.
Wink Martindale.
No. Like, this is so crazy. Like, before Jesse Minter came.
Yeah.
Mike McDonald. Thank you.
Oh, that's McDonald. Yes. Okay.
Okay. So he was with Vanderbilt. And, I mean, back then I was like, okay, well, it looked at what he had done there wasn't that impressive. And maybe that's the same situation for Dante Lynn. And when you go and get better players, your defense looks a little bit more credible, and you look a little more credible. I think he could do that. And then Jim Leonard, man, I think he's a good defensive mind, a really good defensive mind. And
yeah. I mean, we talked about Leonard when this first happened and how he was one of my top guys as well. Doesn't sound like he wants to leave the NFL. He probably don't want to go back recruiting on the road, which I understand, and that's going to be quite frankly, that's going to be a big hurdle for these big time college football programs moving forward. Is they don't want to deal with not just recruiting on the road, but the NIL stuff that comes with it. The dealing with parents, bitching about playing time. They'd rather go to the NFL, just worry about coaching ball, and it can go with it that way. So I'm with you on Leonard. I think he's really solid. I would have loved if he came to Ohio State, but that doesn't sound like it's going to happen. So, it's going to be interesting to see who they do decide to bring in. As far as the offensive line coach goes, do you have someone in mind who you would like to have take that job?
No, honestly, I've been so sick. I saw the news. I haven't been able to look at anyone that could take that job. That's the reason why I did bring up if we could bring someone else in, and also brought Kevin Wilson because he has experiences we talked about earlier with that and tight ends. One of the reasons I wanted to bring up is because with a younger quarterback like Julian Sand, I think when you have a guy that's an offensive line coach, but then you also brought up him being a tight ends coach, which I actually forgot about.
Yep.
For Julian Sand next year, Max Clare is going to be a very important target for him.
Yep.
And I believe if Kevin Wilson were the coach, I think that you're killing two birds with one stone. You get you a guy that has some more experience in play calling, and then you also have someone that can coach the offensive line. I mean, outside of that right now, man, because I've been really sick, I haven't been able to do that, but which I'll probably do it before Thursday. Not probably, I would do it before Thursday. But what names do you have?
Yeah, so, I mean, again, this should be a relatively attractive job as far as the offensive line coach goes because they can pay top dollar, although I don't know how much that is true now that they were $38 million in debt, the athletic department after this year. I don't really I mean, I don't want to spend like $1 million on an offensive line coach, if I'm being honest. So I think to get some of those guys, you would probably have to do that. I again, if we're going, to Tyler's defensive coordinator comment, if we're looking at like the ideal offensive line hire, ideally Kevin Wilson would come back and do an offensive line job, but I don't think he would do that. I think he would only if he would be an offensive coordinator. I don't think he's going all the way down to an offensive line position. So then you turn to some other guys. I mean, if you look at college football and you look at who always has a great offensive line, and the first thing that comes to mind who I would want is right over there in Madison, Wisconsin, and AJ Blazing. He's the guy that does the problem is he's a former Badger and he just took the job, but I would love someone like that. This specific job is not one where I would like to see an internal hire for, because you don't really have anyone on staff who could do that. Hell, I'd even take George Barnett, the offensive line coach from Iowa. He's someone who's been there since 2021. Iowa, again, they typically have a good offensive line. You think more about them from their tight ends perspective, but they have wanted to run the ball and control clock, and they've done a pretty damn good job of that. It's not just because they've had good running back, it's because they've had good offensive line play for guys that they can, open up holes with. I mean, and they've produced, NFL talent in the last few years. So I guess, that would be the guy that I would specifically like to target if it's going to be an outside hire. Again, I don't know how realistic.
Would you go out of the conference?
What?
Would you go out of the conference?
I certainly would, but the problem with the offensive line coach hire is that's going to be predicated on who you bring in for the offensive coordinator, because that's the guy who's going to have the ultimate say. So if you bring in someone from outside the program for the offensive coordinator hire, he's going to want to bring, his guy. I mean, that's just what it's going to be. So I think whoever the I think whoever the offensive coordinator is going to be crucial to finding that next guy who can bring in and develop guys. But I would like to get someone who could recruit a little bit better on the recruiting trail than what Fry did.
Yeah, I would assume if you're an offensive line coach, kind of like any other position coach, you know how to coach the position to some extent. The real question is, do you know how to recruit? Do you know how to get guys in the building? Do you know how to attract these players? Do you know what they like? I think for whoever takes this position, that's what I think the focus needs to be. Like I said, I'm very sure anybody can coach, but it's been very lackluster, the offensive line recruiting at Ohio State over the last, let's call it 4 years.
Go back to the end of the stud area. Yeah, to the stud area too. That recruiting wasn't great.
It's been some time. So
agreed.
And I mean, is there any other position? I mean, I guess you could say something like tight end, but that's a hit or miss. Is there another important position like offensive line that Ohio State has been just swinging and missing at?
I mean, linebackers for a little bit, I think. The linebacker position wasn't really strong until probably last couple of years. I mean, once they moved Sonny to the linebacker this year, Cody Simon the last couple of years started to step things up. But there was a lull in there for a while. Like after Pete Werner left, I thought that's when the linebacker play started to fall. So really from 2021, really up until like last year, and really not even all times last year. I think mostly this year, I think the linebacker play was slipping a little bit. But I mean, no. Other than that, I would say no. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happened, and we'll see what the hires ultimately are. But last thing I wanted to mention here before we get out of here is Ryan Day also decided that spring practice was going to be pushed back this year. They're not going to start as early. So normally what they do is they start spring the week before they start that the week before spring break, and then they go ahead and take that week off, and then they start again after spring break. What they said they're going to do this year is they're just going to start after spring break. They're not going to start them earlier because they had the extended season, which in my opinion, makes sense because they had a much longer 2024 season. It was the longest season in college football history. So I think this is a good idea. What do you think?
I'm not upset at it. I would prefer to have it where it originally was. I think that I don't think that it will mess up the whole off-season timetable. But I think there's something to be said about straight line consistency year after year after year. And because I don't believe changing the date of the spring game is going to really hurt you. Now, or do anything better for you. Now, is it going to hurt you? Probably not. It probably won't. Gives you some extra. Maybe it's going to be good for us, honestly, this year. Gives you some extra reps for Julian before you get into that game or any of the other younger guys around the football team, especially on the defense. I was just like Tyler said. I don't mind it. I'm not upset about it.
I think it's the right move, quite frankly. And you mentioned how you don't like it just because it's not been the norm. I think this becomes the new norm. Now that the college football schedule has extended out into later January, I think this is what teams that get to the national championship are going to do. And I think Ohio State, permanently is probably going to set up their spring schedule like this because they expect to be playing deeper into the year. So I think it's good. The more rest you get, I think is good. Now, would I feel better if they weren't breaking in a new quarterback? Maybe, but just because you're starting later doesn't mean you're not going to have the same amount of practice, practices. Like they're keeping that the same. They're still going to get the same amount of reps. They're starting a little bit later, and quite frankly, maybe the weather will be a little bit better for the spring game because that's typically hit or miss where it is on the schedule right now. So I think it's a good idea, and I just think that it's smart. You want to minimize the amount of wear and tear that these guys have, especially with you. I mean, they just played 16 games. That's an old NFL schedule. So you want to keep these guys as fresh as possible. And I think this is an easy way to do it because this isn't going to affect your fall preparation really at all.
I'm in lockstep with you.
Now, what might happen?
Now, I'll tell you, I would be pissed off if I had a coach saying he didn't want the spring game being played. That would piss me off.
Well, yeah, and I don't think they're going to do that. They're definitely going to play the spring game still. And quite honestly, this next year is probably the only time that they're going to have to worry about this is the spring transfer portal window. Typically, Ohio State's spring game fell right before that. Like last year, it was April 15th. And this year, it is the portal window is the 16th through the 25th. So it's a 10-day window. So if they don't have their spring game before then, that's going to put a lot of Ohio State football players in positions where they're going to have to make decisions before that game's played as far as whether or not they want to leave. And like I said, this may be the only year that they need to do it because they're probably going to get rid of the spring portal window anyway. But that's just one possible consequence of this.
Yeah, I also don't see, and I could be wrong on this, but I also don't see a lot of guys from Ohio State leaving in the spring portal. I think there's a lot of talent or guys on this team that are gonna play a lot, especially on positions like cornerback, safety, D-line, linebacker, running back.
I'm also looking at like quarterback. Like if Lincoln Kienholz wants to get out, he's got to make a decision.
Lincoln Kienholz is still in Columbus. I'll tell you what, I keep saying the only way I believe Lincoln Kienholz is ever going to win that job is if somehow, man, he just hits he just has to hit another step, and his arm just has to get really his arm just really has to develop. I already know he's a better athlete than Julian Sand. I think that goes without saying. He's a much bigger kid than Julian Sand too. I feel like there's some people who really believe that he can win this position.
We're not one of them. I don't think either one of us are one of those people.
And I'm not one. Now, would I be surprised? Yep. Would I be? I would. I mean, it's not like me and you would not be upset if somehow.
I don't think I'd be upset. No,
Yeah.
like if
Yeah,
they think he's somehow the best one, sure.
Dude,
Yeah.
With all the leg ability Keenholz has, if you told me he had the ability to really sling the ball, man, you got me on board. But
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, there's so many positions where we still got to see, and I don't think there's gonna be a lot of guys leaving. I think the spring portal is for a lot of guys, like I said before, who really aren't going to be playing a whole lot no matter where they go. So,
yeah, I agree. Anything else you want to hit before we get out of here?
I don't have anything else. Yourself?
No, I think we're good. So that'll do it for us tonight. We'll see you guys on Thursday for the call-in show at 8 o'clock. And we'll look forward to taking your comments and your call-in then. So we'll see you on Thursday. OH.
I-O.